without forgetting, if you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it, you're an American. But in all seriousness, ladies and gentlemen, I have asked myself that question, you know, what will I teach my daughter? And the answer is somewhere in the following, and it's that I do want to teach her to read, to write, to draw, to paint, to play music and to sing. But most importantly, I want to teach her how to dance. And my favourite story, the story I'm going to tell you tonight, is about a father and a daughter and dancing. Okay, so in a place not so far away and not so long ago, there lived a man by the name of Donnacha. And Donnacha lived in a little white house with a pretty red door at the west end of Sherkin Island. And he was handsome, honest and clever. Because he was clever, he knew that he could add to the happiness in that little white house with a pretty red door at the west end of Sherkin Island if he found for himself a wife. Now, men that are handsome, honest and clever often find for themselves wives that are good and kind and loving, and that is exactly except for Peter, and that's exactly because she's even better than that. But that's exactly the type of wife that Donnacha found for himself in the fine figure of Niamh, who can best be described as Goige, bevackelach perlach, dreimrach barachas, a carnal crevach groige, shilleg a talavas a grinscob and a drochta, bawling her father, carnal crevach groige, ach bechacht noor in isaile fos a canahis snitte, a knas kalke, mar vlan nor ni, a ganoush mar green duskach leegil, a bailey midishach on the glare, which means she was very good looking. That's the direct translation. But obviously, they fell deeply in love, they got married, and as is the way with these things, soon after were joined by a third person, a beautiful baby girl, who they named Deirdre. Is that a dangerous name?
No.
I'm not changing it, but that was her name. That was her name.
Don't call her Evelyn.
Okay. Now, of course, as Deirdre grew up, Donnacha taught her to read, to write, to draw, to paint, to play music and to sing, without ever forgetting the most important lessons. He taught her how to dance. When she was too small to stand herself, Donnacha cradled her in his arms and sang to her as they waltzed around the kitchen by the light of the fire in the grate. When she was strong enough to hold her own weight, he stood her on the tips of his toes and they danced around the kitchen to the joyful strains of the record player in the corner. By the time that Deirdre was 5 years of age, she could dance with such passion and grace that the flickering flames in the heart seemed to burn bright with envy as they lit the flagstone stage for her. Dancing for Deirdre was the moving sea that joined the twin shores of her body and soul together, and she rejoiced in it. Her greatest joy, ladies and gentlemen, was saved for that special moment when her father would take to the floor with her and they would dance together, arm in arm, round and round, until the music died away. And on Sherkin Island, where they lived, whenever rosin was put to a bow, or lips to a whistle, or hands to the buttons and bellows, Deirdre's feet would begin to itch, and soon she would be weaving a tapestry of movement with threads of gesture and poise, transforming the work of the musicians into shape and colour and life. Her greatest joy, however, was saved for that moment when her father would take to the floor with her and they would dance arm in arm, round and round, until the music died away. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is a truth universally acknowledged, you all know about it. There is another truth universally acknowledged, and it is this: any man who is blessed with a daughter will be surely cursed if he does not do his best for her. And so it was that by the time that Deirdre was 7 years of age, Donnacha knew that there was something he had to do for his beautiful dancing daughter. Now it happened, ladies and gentlemen, that close by that little white house with the pretty red door on the west end of Sherkin Island, there was a liss, a dún, a fairy fort. And it also happened that Donnacha knew all about the particular band of fairies that lived in that fort. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't believe in fairies, but they are, of course, real. Now,
Sure as you're riding that high. Absolutely.
Now Donnacha, as I say, knew all about these fairies. Over the years, he had seen their comings and goings. He had smelled their cooking and their brewing. He had heard their singing and their dancing. And he knew what they did on nights when the moon was full. Because many years before that, he had seen it himself with his own two eyes. He had been standing outside the cottage one night, one moon-filled night, one night when the moon was full, smoking his clay pipe, when he saw out of the ground near the liss a she-oak, a fairy, jump up out of a hole. And that fairy sauntered down to the seashore and strolled out to the promontory where the moonbeams that shimmered across the water seemed to touch the land. And the fairy covered his eyes with one hand, reached up with the other, higher, higher, and higher, and then he plucked the moon from the sky. With his eyes still covered, he took the silvery ball of light and put it in his pocket, and then turned and skipped off back to the liss. Now little did he know, ladies and gentlemen, that Donnacha was following him. The fairy reached the liss, jumped back down the hole out of which he had come, and Donnacha carefully, oh so carefully, quietly, oh so quietly, he crept up to the same spot, and then he parted the blades of grass and looked down and was enchanted by what he saw beneath the sod. There it was, ladies and gentlemen, a fairy hall, and around the edge of the hall were trestle tables heaped high with the finest of food. In one corner were barrels of porter and poteen. And all around were gathered the fairy host, bedecked in finery of every weft and hue imaginable. But of most interest to Donnacha was, of course, that fairy he had seen moments before down by the seashore. He stood in the middle of the crowd with all eyes on him. He took out the glowing moon, threw it high in the air, and cried, "Let the feast begin!" And there was a massive cheer from all and sundry.
Yay!
And one get up you buy from the back. And magical moonlight washed around the hall as the glowing moon drifted towards the roof of the cavern. And then, ladies and gentlemen, it began. First, with a low whistle, soon joined by the hum of a fiddle, then a bowron was leathered, and the flagstones on the floor seemed to throb and quiver with the insistent beat. Instrument after instrument joined the chorus. And what music it was, ladies and gentlemen. Music burgeoning with vigour and life. Music beyond the threadbare limitations of language and imagination. Music at the very extremity of the soul's capacity for joy. Moon music. And with the music came the dancing to match it. Below him, Donnacha watched the fairies leap and skip and jump in intertwining intricate patterns of increasing delight. And up above them, his feet began to itch, and soon he was jigging along with the best of them. And so it was, ladies and gentlemen, that many years later, Donnacha, on the night of Deirdre's 7th birthday, a full moon and moon-filled night, he looked around the kitchen in his little white house, with the pretty red door at the west end of Sherkin Island, and took in all that he and Niamh and Deirdre had done that evening. There was a trestle table heaped high with food, barrels of porter and poteen in the corner. All was ready. He turned to his wife and daughter and said, "Douse the fire, put out the candles." And then he put on his hat and coat and walked out the door. He sauntered down to the seashore, strolled out to the promontory where the moonbeams that shimmered across the water seemed to touch the land, covered his eyes with one hand, reached up with the other, higher, 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 and plucked the moon from the sky. With his eyes still covered, he took the silvery ball of light, put it in his pocket, turned around, and made his way back to the cottage. Now Donnacha knew very, very well that a small fairy was following him. He came in through the front door, took off the hat and coat, took out the silvery ball of light, threw it high in the air, and Niamh and Deirdre clapped and laughed with joy. And then it began. First, a low whistle that seemed to drift through the cracks and the gaps in the bricks and the thatch. Then it was joined by the hum of a fiddle. Soon a bowron was leathered, and the flagstones on the floor seemed to throb and quiver with the insistent beat. Instrument after instrument joined the chorus, and what music it was. Music burgeoning with vigour and life. Music, beyond the threadbare limitations of language and imagination, music at the very extremity of the soul's capacity for joy. Moon music. And with the music came the dancing, because the fairy host came through those cracks and gaps, still bedecked in finery of every weft and hue, and they started to dance and leap and skip in intertwining intricate patterns of increasing delight. But then, ladies and gentlemen, then Deirdre stood up, and the crowd parted, and she began to dance. Like a raindrop twinkling on the edge of a falling leaf, she danced. Like the playful footsteps of a carefree wind across a field of barley, she danced. Like the salt sea spray whipped from the top of the wave caps in a storm, she danced. And the fairies stood back and watched her, and had to admit that there were other creatures in this world that were also filled with magic.